In a snow-covered train station on a quiet winter morning, a Navy SEAL was walking through the crowd with his German Shepherd at his side, until the dog suddenly stopped. Then it began barking wildly at a pregnant woman's bag, not out of aggression, not out of fear, but because something inside that bag didn't have much time left. As people stared and security moved closer, the woman whispered one sentence that changed everything. "Please, don't open it like that." What was hidden inside would force a hardened warrior to choose between following the rules and saving a life. If you believe courage, compassion, and loyalty still matter in this world, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Because sometimes the true hero of the story walks on four legs. Chicago woke beneath a hard, brilliant winter sky, the kind that made everything feel sharper and more exposed. Snow drifted down in a fine, dry fall, not heavy enough to blind the streets, but persistent enough to coat stone, steel, and shoulders in a pale silver dust. Union Station stood at the heart of it all, massive, dignified, and glowing with reflected light. Its tall windows caught the morning sun and threw it back across the plaza, turning footprints into mirrors and breath into clouds. Commuters moved through the cold with practiced efficiency, collars raised, hands tucked deep into pockets, faces set in that familiar Midwestern expression of endurance rather than complaint. Winter here was not a surprise. It was a test everyone had learned to pass quietly. Jack Walker stepped into that brightness as if he belonged to it. He was in his mid-30s, tall and solid without being bulky, built the way men were shaped by years of function rather than appearance. His face was sharply angled, with a strong jaw and a faint line running down one cheek, a scar earned long ago and never spoken about. A short, neatly kept beard darkened his jawline, more habit than style, and his eyes were a muted gray, the color of steel left out in the cold. He wore a Navy working uniform, digital camouflage flowing uninterrupted across the jacket and trousers, no solid panels anywhere, not at the front placket, not across the chest, not even on the pocket flaps. The uniform looked worn but meticulously maintained, like its owner, disciplined, quiet, and uncompromising. A simple backpack rested against his shoulders, straps adjusted with military precision. Walking at Jack's left side was Ranger, a German Shepherd just past 4 years old, large and powerful, his dark sable coat thick and healthy against the cold. Black overlay framed his back and neck like a natural mantle, while his legs and underside carried warmer tan tones. Ranger's ears stood alert, swiveling independently as he absorbed the sounds of the station, the echo of boots on stone, the hiss of opening doors, the distant groan of a departing train. His movements were smooth and controlled, his posture confident but restrained. This was not a dog that reacted without reason. His eyes, deep amber and intelligent, scanned constantly, cataloging the world in ways Jack had long learned to trust more than his own instincts. Ranger was calm, almost serene, the kind of presence that put others at ease without trying to. Jack and Ranger had passed through places far harsher than a Chicago winter morning. Crowded spaces did not bother them, noise did not unsettle them, human chaos was something they had learned to navigate together, one step at a time. Jack had left active service behind, but the habits remained, the way he positioned his body near exits, the way his gaze drifted without lingering, the way he unconsciously matched his breathing to Ranger's steady rhythm. Whatever storms had shaped him had also taught him silence. He did not explain himself to strangers, and he did not invite questions. They were halfway across the main concourse when everything changed. At first, it was subtle, a hesitation in Ranger's stride, a fractional pause that only someone who knew him intimately would notice. Jack felt the shift through the leash before he saw it. Ranger's head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring as he sampled the air again, more deliberately this time. The dog's ears angled forward, then locked. Jack slowed instinctively, eyes following Ranger's line of sight through the moving crowd. That was when he saw her. The woman stood near one of the long stone columns, partially shielded from the wind, as if she had chosen the spot deliberately. She was in her late 20s or early 30s, average height, but appearing smaller because of how she held herself, shoulders drawn inward protectively. A long winter coat wrapped around her frame, dark wool reaching nearly to her calves, its buttons strained slightly at the front by the unmistakable curve of a pregnant belly. Her hair, chestnut brown and slightly wavy, had been pulled back hastily, loose strands escaping around her pale face. Her skin was light, almost translucent in the cold, with a faint flush on her cheeks that spoke of exhaustion more than warmth. She carried no makeup beyond what life had left her with, dark circles under her eyes, tension etched around her mouth. In her hands, clutched close to her body, was a large fabric bag. Not a suitcase, not a purse, something in between. The canvas was worn and heavy-looking, its sides sagging slightly as if whatever lay inside refused to settle into a fixed shape. The woman held it the way people held fragile things, not tightly enough to crush, but not loosely enough to risk dropping. Ranger stopped. The leash went taut. Then Ranger barked, sharp, loud, and sudden enough to cut through the steady noise of the station like a crack of thunder. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Ranger barked again, deeper this time, his body shifting forward, muscles coiling beneath his thick coat. It was not the playful bark of a distracted dog. It was not even an aggressive one. It was urgent, insistent. Jack was pulled half a step off his path before he braced, boots scraping softly against the stone. His hand tightened around the leash, his other instinctively moving to steady Ranger's shoulder. "Easy," he murmured, low and controlled. Ranger did not obey. His attention was locked entirely on the bag. The woman looked up. Her eyes were wide, a clear, startled blue, and when they met Jack's, something passed across her face too quickly to name. Fear, yes, but layered with something else. Recognition, perhaps, or relief. Her grip on the bag tightened, knuckles whitening. She took an involuntary step back, nearly colliding with the column behind her. People around them slowed, curiosity blooming into discomfort. A man in a business coat frowned. A couple near the ticket machines whispered. Someone laughed nervously, assuming it was just a dog misbehaving. But Jack saw what they did not. Ranger's hackles were not raised. His teeth were not bared. His body was tense, but not hostile. This was not an attack. This was an alert. The woman swallowed hard. Her free hand drifted instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture so natural it seemed unconscious. Her breathing quickened, visible now in the cold air. When she spoke, her voice was barely more than a breath, fragile and shaking. "Please," she whispered, eyes darting briefly to the gathering onlookers before returning to Jack. Don't let them open it." The words landed heavier than the bark. Jack studied her in silence. He took in the way her posture curved inward, not defiant but defensive. The way her eyes flicked between Ranger and the exits, calculating distances, options. This was not the behavior of someone caught doing something wrong. This was the behavior of someone cornered by circumstances far larger than herself. Ranger barked once more, then shifted closer, nose stretching toward the bag as far as the leash would allow. His tail was stiff, not wagging, not tucked. His breathing had changed, shorter, quicker, like he was working to regulate himself. Jack felt it then, a familiar tightening in his chest. Ranger did not react like this without cause, ever. Jack lowered his voice when he spoke, keeping it even, almost gentle. "Ma'am," he said, meeting her gaze steadily, "what's in the bag?" The woman shook her head, tears welling at the corners of her eyes but not falling. "It's not dangerous," she said quickly, too quickly. "I swear, it's fragile." Ranger let out a low, troubled sound, not a growl, not a bark, but something in between, a vibration that carried distress rather than threat. Jack felt the weight of the moment settle over him, the way it always did, just before something irreversible happened. He looked at the woman again, really looked at her this time, at the exhaustion carved into her face, at the way she stood alone in the brightness of Union Station, snowlight glinting off the floor around her like broken glass, at the fear in her eyes, raw, human, and unmistakable. This was not the look of a criminal. It was the look of someone running from something cruel enough to leave no good choices behind. And Jack Walker, Navy SEAL, knew that look all too well. Jack did not raise his voice. He did not tighten his grip in a way that would signal threat. He simply shifted his stance, planting his boots more firmly against the polished stone floor of Union Station, angling his body so he stood between the woman and the growing attention around them. Ranger continued to growl, low in his chest, the sound vibrating through the leash like a warning current, while his eyes never left the bag. Jack had seen this posture before, never in crowded terminals or civilian places, but in moments when Ranger had detected something fragile and urgent, something that demanded care rather than force. Jack slid his palm down the leash, close enough to feel the dog's muscles trembling beneath thick fur. "Easy," he said again, quieter this time, not as an order, but as reassurance. Ranger's bark softened into a strained whine, and he leaned forward, nose hovering inches from the canvas. inhaling in short, careful breaths as if afraid a deeper breath might disturb whatever lay inside. The woman, Emily, stood frozen. Her coat hung open just enough to reveal the unmistakable curve of late pregnancy, the fabric stretched and creased from weeks of wear. Her face had gone pale beneath the station's bright winter light, lips parted slightly as she fought to steady her breathing. One hand rested protectively on her belly, fingers splayed as if shielding two lives at once. The other clenched the strap of the bag so tightly that her knuckles had lost all color. She looked younger up close, Jack realized, younger than her eyes suggested. Those eyes carried exhaustion layered with fear, the kind that did not come from guilt, but from being hunted by consequences she could not outrun. A murmur rippled through the nearby crowd. A man in a gray wool coat slowed his stride. A woman dragging a rolling suitcase paused mid-step. Phones appeared, first one, then another, held low, pretending discretion while recording everything. The winter light made the scene feel sharper, brighter, harder to hide in. Jack disliked that. He had learned long ago that truth became more dangerous when surrounded by spectators who only wanted spectacle. From the edge of the concourse, a uniformed security officer approached, her pace brisk but controlled. She was in her early 40s, tall and lean, with a posture that suggested years of standing between order and chaos. Her name badge read, Sarah Mills. Dark blonde hair was pulled back into a tight bun, practical and severe, revealing a face marked by clean lines and pale skin weathered slightly by Midwestern winters. Her eyes were a cool hazel, sharp but not unkind, the eyes of someone who had learned to read people quickly because hesitation often made situations worse. A radio was clipped at her shoulder, and one hand hovered near it without touching. "What's going on here?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but firm, practiced in de-escalation. Her gaze flicked first to Ranger, then to Jack's uniform, then finally to Emily and the bag. The order of that glance mattered. Jack noticed it immediately. Jack turned his head just enough to acknowledge her. "My dog picked up on something," he said evenly. He did not volunteer more than necessary. He never had. Ranger let out another low sound, shifting his weight closer to Emily despite Jack's steady hold. His tail remained stiff, not wagging, not tucked, a clear sign of intense focus rather than agitation. Sarah watched him carefully, her brow tightening a fraction. She had seen dogs bark before. She had not often seen one react like this, controlled, insistent, almost protective. Emily swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thin. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Her words came fast, tripping over one another. "We're just passing through." "Ma'am," Sarah said gently, adjusting her stance to appear less imposing, "I'm going to need you to take a step back from the bag." Emily shook her head immediately, panic flashing across her face. "Please," she said again, the word cracking as it left her mouth. "Please don't." Jack's jaw tightened slightly. He could feel Ranger's breathing change again, quicker now, as if the dog sensed the tightening circle of authority and fear. Jack lowered his voice further, directing it only to Emily. "No one's opening anything yet," he said, "but I need you to help me understand." Emily looked at him then, really looked at him, not at the uniform, not at the dog, but at his face. Something shifted in her expression, a fragile hope flickering behind the fear. "It's not dangerous," she repeated, as if the words themselves were a shield. "It's just, it shouldn't exist." The phrase hung between them, strange and unsettling. Jack had heard many explanations in his life. This one felt different. Not defensive, not rehearsed. It sounded like grief wrapped in inevitability. Sarah took another step closer, her boots echoing softly against the stone. "Sir," she said to Jack, keeping her tone respectful but authoritative, "we've got people filming now. If there's a risk, I need to know." Jack glanced around, taking in the phones, the tightening semicircle of onlookers, the way the bright winter light made every movement impossible to conceal. He exhaled slowly. "There's no immediate threat," he said, "but whatever's in that bag matters to him." He nodded toward Ranger, "and he doesn't react like this without a reason." Sarah studied Ranger again, then the bag. She noticed the way the canvas sagged unevenly, the way Emily's grip adjusted instinctively whenever Ranger leaned closer, as if she were compensating for something delicate inside. Her expression shifted from suspicion to calculation. "All right," she said after a beat. "Let's take this somewhere quieter." Emily stiffened. No, she said, fear sharpening her voice. I can't. Jack held up a hand, a small gesture, not commanding but steady. A side room, he said softly. Glass walls, bright lights, no surprises. He looked at Sarah. We keep this visible. Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding. There's a screening room near the west corridor, she said. We can talk there. She turned slightly, angling her body to create a path rather than a blockade. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting toward the exits again, toward the trains, toward the illusion of escape. Her breathing quickened. Ranger let out a soft, distressed whine and pressed closer, his nose brushing the fabric of her coat near the bag. The contact was gentle, almost careful, and Emily flinched, then relaxed slightly, as if the warmth of the dog grounded her. She nodded once, barely perceptible. They moved slowly, deliberately. Jack walked at Emily's side, his body subtly shielding her from the crowd. Sarah led the way, speaking quietly into her radio, requesting minimal assistance. Ranger stayed close to the bag, his movements measured as if escorting rather than pursuing. The onlookers followed for a few steps, then fell back, interest dulled by the lack of spectacle. The screening room was smaller than the concourse but still flooded with winter light, glass walls reflecting the snow outside and the station's interior in overlapping layers. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and cold air. Sarah gestured for Emily to place the bag on the metal table in the center. Emily froze again, fingers tightening. Jack watched the way her shoulders rose, the way her lips trembled. You don't have to open it, Jack said quietly. Just set it down. With a shaking breath, Emily lowered the bag onto the table. The fabric made a dull, heavy sound as it touched metal. Ranger stiffened instantly, ears snapping forward, body leaning in so far Jack had to brace again. Then it happened. A sound came from inside the bag. It was faint, almost imperceptible. A soft movement, like fabric shifting, or something breathing too weakly to be heard unless you were listening for it. Ranger froze, then let out a low, urgent whine that sent a chill through Jack's spine. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, her professional composure cracking just enough to reveal alarm. Jack felt it then, unmistakably. Whatever was inside that bag was alive, and whatever it was, it did not have much time. The glass-walled screening room sat like a crystal box inside Union Station, every surface polished, every corner exposed to the relentless winter light pouring through the concourse windows. There were no shadows here, no places to hide uncertainty. The ceiling lights hummed softly, bright and clinical, reflecting off the metal table at the center of the room. Snow beyond the glass drifted steadily, turning the outside world into a pale, moving backdrop, while inside, the air felt colder, for reasons that had nothing to do with temperature. Emily stood just inside the threshold, her posture rigid, shoulders drawn tight beneath her long coat. The moment the doors slid shut behind them, she flinched, as if the sound alone had trapped her. Please, she whispered again, her voice trembling. Don't shine the lights directly. Don't make it panic. She did not say what it was. She didn't have to. The way her hand hovered over the bag, fingers curved protectively, said more than words ever could. Jack positioned himself slightly in front of her, a quiet, deliberate act. Under the harsh white lights, his Navy working uniform stood out in sharp relief, the digital camouflage uninterrupted across his jacket and chest, the fabric bearing the faint creases of long wear. He looked almost carved from the same winter steel as the station itself, unmoving, weathered, and stubbornly present. His face remained calm, but his eyes were alert, tracking every motion, every reflection in the glass. This was not fear. This was vigilance, honed by years of standing between danger and people who didn't see it coming. Ranger surprised everyone by doing the opposite of what they expected. He stopped barking. The low growls that had vibrated through the room moments earlier faded into silence. The German shepherd stepped closer to the table and then sat, posture straight, breathing slow and controlled. His ears relaxed slightly, no longer pinned forward in alarm, and his tail rested still against the floor. It was as if he had made a decision. Panic would only make things worse. Ranger's calm spread through the room like a held breath finally released. Even Sarah Mills, standing near the glass with her arms loosely crossed, seemed to register the shift. Sarah watched the dog carefully. Up close, she appeared even taller, her lean frame outlined by the reflective glass behind her. Fine lines framed her eyes, not from age alone but from years of squinting into unpredictable situations. Her skin was fair, freckled lightly across the bridge of her nose, and her expression now was thoughtful rather than suspicious. She had spent more than a decade in station security, long enough to know that rules existed for a reason, but also long enough to recognize when those rules collided with something more complicated than a checklist. "Okay," Sarah said quietly, keeping her voice level. "Nobody's touching anything yet." She gestured subtly to the ceiling lights, adjusting their intensity just a fraction lower. "We'll keep it steady." Emily exhaled shakily, relief flickering across her face before fear reclaimed its place. She nodded once, then pressed her palm against her belly, grounding herself. Jack noticed the way she shifted her weight, compensating instinctively, protecting herself and the unseen life she carried. She looked exhausted now that the adrenaline had ebbed, dark shadows deepening beneath her eyes. Whatever she was running from had not started today. Jack glanced at the scanner unit resting against the far wall, a portable device used routinely for bags left unattended or flagged by canine units. It was compact, efficient, and unforgivingly precise. "What's the protocol?" he asked Sarah, keeping his tone neutral. Sarah hesitated. "Standard scan," she said. "No opening unless there's a clear threat." Her gaze moved back to Emily. "But if there's something alive in there—" She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Emily's head snapped up. "They'll take it," she said hoarsely. "They always do. They say it's procedure, that it's safer that way." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, tears spilled over, streaking down her pale cheeks. "I can't let that happen. I won't survive it." Jack turned toward her fully now. He saw the truth in her fear, the kind that came from experience rather than imagination. "You don't sound like someone hiding a crime," he said quietly. "You sound like someone who's already lost too much." Emily swallowed, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of that statement had finally caught up with her. "If they see it," she murmured, barely audible, "they'll take it away. And I'll lose everything." Ranger shifted, standing slowly and stepping closer to the table. He did not touch the bag. He simply positioned himself beside it, body angled protectively, head lowered slightly as if listening. His presence was steady, grounding, and unmistakably intentional. Jack had seen Ranger behave this way only once before, years ago, during a collapsed building search when a survivor lay trapped beneath concrete and dust. Back then, Ranger had done the same thing, gone quiet, gone still, conserving energy for what mattered. Sarah noticed the parallel even if she didn't know its history. She uncrossed her arms and moved toward the scanner. "I'm going to run a passive scan," she said. "No noise, no vibration." She paused, meeting Emily's eyes. "If you want me to stop, say it." Emily nodded, her lips pressed together, tears continuing to fall silently. Jack placed a steadying hand on the edge of the table, close enough to the bag to feel its faint warmth through the fabric. It was subtle, but it was there, undeniable. His jaw tightened. The scanner hummed softly as Sarah activated it, the sound barely louder than the ventilation system. The screen flickered to life, filling with layered gray shapes as the sensor passed slowly over the bag. Jack watched intently, his focus narrowing until the rest of the room faded away. Ranger's ears perked slightly, his breathing changing just enough for Jack to notice. At first, there was nothing remarkable. Fabric, straps, dense folds. Sarah moved the scanner again, slower this time, angling it with practiced precision. The image shifted, and then it happened. A small movement appeared on the screen, subtle, brief, but unmistakable. Sarah froze mid-motion. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice dropping. Jack nodded once. "Run it again." The scanner passed over the same area. The image pulsed. Something inside shifted, not abruptly but weakly, like a tired response to light or sound. Ranger let out a soft, distressed whine, his tail lowering as he leaned closer, eyes fixed on the screen now instead of the bag. Emily covered her mouth, a sob breaking free despite her efforts to contain it. "Please," she whispered, voice shaking, "please don't scare it." Sarah's face had changed completely. The professional mask was still there, but beneath it was something raw, concern edged with urgency. "That's movement," she said quietly. "There's no question." She looked at Jack, then back at Emily. "Whatever's in there is alive." The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the scanner and the distant sounds of the station beyond the glass. Jack felt the weight of the moment settle heavily in his chest. This was no longer about security protocols or suspicious behavior. This was about time. Ranger pressed his nose gently against the side of the bag, inhaling carefully, then stepped back and sat again, as if signaling patience rather than alarm. Jack recognized the gesture instantly. Ranger was waiting for them to do the right thing. Sarah lowered the scanner and set it carefully on the table. "We can't ignore this," she said, her voice firm now. "But we can't rush it either." She looked at Emily. "You're going to have to tell us something. Not everything, just enough." Emily's shoulders shook as she nodded, eyes fixed on the bag. She drew a shaky breath. "If you open it the wrong way," she said, voice barely holding together, "it'll panic. And if it panics—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Jack straightened slightly, his gaze steady. "Then we don't open it yet," he said. "We slow down." He looked at Sarah. Bright lights, cold rules, but we're still human. Sarah met his eyes, then glanced at Ranger, who remained seated, calm and watchful. After a long moment, she nodded. "All right," she said. "We proceed carefully." On the scanner screen, the faint outline flickered once more, a tiny, unmistakable movement that confirmed what they all now knew. Something alive was inside that bag, fragile and running out of strength. And whatever rules applied to this place, they were about to be tested in ways none of them had expected. Jack raised one hand, palm outward, a quiet signal that carried more authority than a shouted command. The room responded instantly. Sarah stopped mid-step. The scanner's hum was cut. Even the distant noise of the station beyond the glass seemed to dim, as if the building itself sensed the gravity of the moment. "Slow," Jack said, his voice low and even. "We open it slow." He didn't look at Emily when he said it. He looked at Ranger, reading the dog's posture the way he had learned to read weather, subtle shifts, the promise of change. Ranger stood close to the table now, head lowered, ears relaxed but attentive, his breathing measured. He was not alarmed, he was pleading. Emily broke. The restraint she had held together since the concourse finally gave way, and she folded inward, one arm wrapping around her belly as if bracing against a wave. Tears came fast and hot, cutting clean lines down her pale cheeks. "I'm in my last month," she said, the words tumbling out between breaths. "I couldn't stay. I ran all night. I didn't stop, because if I stopped, they'd find me." Her chest hitched. Chicago was the only place I could think of where I could disappear in the light. She laughed once, hollow and brittle. "Isn't that stupid? Hiding in the brightest place I could find." Jack did not answer. He placed his hand on the zipper pull, 2 fingers only, steady and deliberate. The metal was cold. He felt it through his skin. "We don't rush," he said again, mostly for Emily, partly for himself. "If there's fear in there, it will feel it." He glanced at Sarah. "Dim the lights another notch." Sarah nodded and adjusted the panel. The brightness softened just enough to ease the edge without inviting shadow. Up close, she looked more human now, the tension in her jaw visible, the freckles at her temples standing out against skin gone pale with concern. She had seen thefts, fights, medical emergencies. She had not expected this. "We're with you," she said quietly to Emily, the firmness in her voice replaced by something gentler. "You're not alone." Emily nodded, though she did not look convinced. Her gaze never left Jack's hand on the zipper. Ranger stepped forward a fraction, his nose almost touching the canvas, and released a soft, broken sound, neither bark nor whine, but something intimate, a sound dogs made only when they recognized vulnerability. Jack inhaled once, then pulled. The zipper moved a centimeter. Nothing happened. Another centimeter. The sound was barely audible, a soft rasp that felt unnaturally loud in the stillness. Emily gasped, clamping a hand over her mouth. Ranger froze, muscles taut, eyes fixed on the widening gap. Jack paused, waiting. He remembered rubble and dust, remembered how survivors panicked at sudden light. He adjusted his angle, shielding the opening with his body, letting only a sliver of softened brightness reach inside. The zipper opened enough to reveal fabric, an old blanket, frayed and thin, the kind given away in shelters or pulled from forgotten trunks. It was stained and worn, folded carefully, deliberately, as if someone had tried to make it softer than it was. Jack eased it back another inch. Something moved. It was small, trembling. A subtle shift beneath the blanket, like a breath taken with effort. Ranger released a low, urgent whine and stepped closer, his tail lowering, his entire posture changing from alert to protective. Jack's chest tightened. He knew that sound. He had heard it once before, in the desert, when Ranger had found a child hidden beneath collapsed canvas, too weak to cry. Jack lifted the blanket just enough. The puppy lay curled beneath it, impossibly small, ribs faintly visible beneath patchy fur. It was a German shepherd, no more than a few weeks old, its coat a muted mix of dark and tan that had not yet settled into its adult pattern. One tiny paw twitched weakly, nails barely formed. Its eyes fluttered open, cloudy with exhaustion, and for a heartbeat, it stared straight at Ranger. Something passed between them that no one in the room could name. Ranger's ears softened, his head lowering until his nose hovered inches from the puppy. He let out the gentlest sound imaginable, a breath more than a noise. The puppy answered with a faint, fragile yelp, then sagged deeper into the blanket as if the effort had drained what little strength it had left. No one spoke. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her professional composure dissolved entirely, replaced by shock and an unmistakable swell of emotion. Emily collapsed into a chair, sobbing openly now, shoulders shaking, relief and terror crashing together. Jack felt his throat tighten. He had prepared himself for many things. This had not been one of them. "It was behind a shed," Emily said through her tears, the words spilling out as if confession were the only thing holding her upright. "Collapsed boards, rain everywhere. I thought it was already gone. Then it moved." She pressed her palm to her belly, breathing hard. "They told me to report it. They said they'd handle it. I know what that means." Her eyes lifted to Jack, raw and desperate. "I couldn't let them kill it." Ranger nudged the edge of the bag gently, then sat, positioning his body between the puppy and the room as if to block any sudden movement. His breathing slowed, steady and deliberate, a calming rhythm. The puppy's chest rose and fell, shallow but persistent. Jack watched it, counting breaths without realizing he was doing it. Then he felt it, the shift in the room that had nothing to do with the puppy. Jack straightened slightly, his instincts flaring, the same sensation that had once warned him of danger seconds before it arrived. He looked up and saw the man outside the glass. Mr. Hayes stood just beyond the screening room door, his reflection fractured across the glass panels. He was in his late 40s, tall and angular, with a face carved by sharp lines and impatience rather than age. A dark overcoat hung neatly from his shoulders, tailored to emphasize authority. His hair was steel gray at the temples, combed back with meticulous care. A trimmed beard framed his mouth, more style than necessity, and his eyes, cold, calculating, never left the bag. Hayes did not look surprised. He looked confirmed. Jack felt a cold thread run down his spine. Hayes's posture was relaxed, hands at his sides, weight balanced easily on polished shoes that had never known slush or hurry. This was a man accustomed to watching problems resolve themselves, or being resolved by others. Sarah followed Jack's gaze and stiffened. "Who is that?" she murmured. "I don't know," Jack said, his eyes never leaving Hayes. "But he knows her." Emily saw him then. The color drained from her face so fast it was frightening. Her breath hitched violently, and she shrank back in the chair, one arm wrapping around her belly as if bracing for impact. "He found me," she whispered. Hayes's mouth curved, not quite a smile. He reached into his coat and pulled out a phone. For a moment he simply held it, his gaze flicking deliberately, from the bag to Ranger to Emily's rounded stomach. Then he raised the phone to his ear and turned slightly away, speaking too softly to hear. Jack stepped closer to the table, his body angling protectively. Ranger stood as well, positioning himself between the puppy and the glass, ears forward now, eyes locked on Hayes. It was not aggression, it was warning. Whatever Emily had fled from had not stayed behind, and whatever rules governed this bright, glass-walled room were about to be tested by something colder, sharper, and far less forgiving. Hayes lowered the phone. His eyes returned to Emily's belly, lingering there with unsettling intent. Jack felt the moment stretch, thin and dangerous, like ice about to crack, and he knew, with sudden clarity that saving the puppy had been only the beginning. Jack felt it before he could explain it, the familiar tightening behind the ribs, the quiet pressure that told him the danger was no longer theoretical. It wasn't the puppy. The small German shepherd lay bundled inside the bag, breathing shallowly but steadily now, soothed by Ranger's presence and the careful dimming of light. The threat came from outside that fragile circle, from eyes that watched without blinking, and bodies that moved with intention rather than curiosity. Jack had learned long ago that predators rarely announce themselves. They waited for the moment when light made escape impossible. Emily sat rigid on the chair, hands folded in her lap as if she were trying to keep herself from unraveling. Her tears had slowed, leaving her face drawn and pale. She looked older now, stripped of the frantic energy that had carried her through the night. The long coat hung open slightly at the front, her pregnancy undeniable, a fact that had shaped every decision she'd made in the last hours. She took a careful breath and spoke without being prompted, as if the truth had finally outweighed the fear of saying it aloud. "I used to volunteer," she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse but steadying. "A private rescue. That's what they called it." She gave a bitter smile that never reached her eyes. It looked clean. Donations, foster programs, partnerships. People like to feel good about saving animals. She glanced at the bag. But some rescues don't rescue, they harvest. Jack did not interrupt. Ranger remained standing, positioned close enough to the table that his shoulder brushed the canvas. His ears twitched occasionally, tracking movement beyond the glass, his body language a study in restraint. Sarah stood a few steps away, arms folded now, not in authority but in concentration, absorbing every word. "They moved animals fast," Emily continued. "Too fast. No records that matched, puppies that vanished, transfers that never arrived anywhere." Her jaw tightened. "I asked questions. I shouldn't have." She lifted her eyes to Jack, and for a moment he saw the steel beneath the fear. "I found out they were selling them. Breeding, testing, shipping, whatever paid. When I tried to leave, they told me I owed them, that I'd signed things." She let out a breath that trembled. "They were wrong. I owed them nothing." Jack nodded once. He had seen organizations rot from the inside before, watched good causes become convenient covers. "And the puppy?" he asked. "I found him when everything collapsed," Emily said. "A shipment gone wrong. He was sick, too small. They would have disposed of him." Her hand drifted to her belly again, instinctive and fierce. "I couldn't let that happen. Not now." She did not finish the thought, but Jack understood. When the world narrowed to protecting life, compromises disappeared. Ranger's low rumble cut through the room, not a growl, not quite, but a sound of warning. Jack turned, following the dog's gaze to the glass. Mr. Hayes stood closer now, no longer pretending to be a passerby, delayed by curiosity. His dark coat was immaculate, collar turned up just enough to frame his angular face. He moved with the ease of someone accustomed to command, shoulders back, chin lifted. When he smiled, it was thin and controlled, the expression of a man used to watching other people decide poorly. Hayes stepped aside as if to let someone pass, and two men appeared at the edge of the corridor beyond the glass. They wore civilian jackets, muted colors, practical shoes. Their hair was cropped short, their movements synchronized in a way that was impossible to miss once you knew what to look for. One was broad-shouldered with a thick neck and a blunt face marked by old, healed cuts. The other was leaner, taller, his jaw narrow, eyes hidden behind dark lenses despite the brightness of the station. Both stood with their hands tucked casually into their coat pockets, weight balanced evenly on the balls of their feet. Too balanced, too ready. Jack's eyes narrowed. "We need to move," he said quietly to Sarah. She followed his line of sight and stiffened. "Those aren't commuters," she murmured. Her training caught up to her instincts with a visible click. "I can call for backup." "Do it," Jack said. "But we don't wait." Emily looked between them, panic flaring again. "They'll take him," she whispered. "They'll say he's evidence, or property." "Not if we keep this public," Jack said. He slipped his pack fully onto his shoulders and reached for the bag. "We walk, bright spaces, no corners." He met Sarah's eyes. "We don't give them a room." Sarah nodded sharply, already speaking into her radio, her voice clipped and professional. "I need units to the West Concourse," she said. "Plainclothes, possible interference." She cut the channel and stepped aside, opening the door with a practiced movement that invited flow rather than hesitation. Jack lifted the bag carefully, cradling it against his chest so the puppy remained supported. Ranger moved instantly to his left, body aligned, eyes scanning ahead. Emily rose unsteadily and fell into step on Jack's right, one hand braced against her belly, the other gripping the edge of his sleeve as if the contact alone anchored her. They emerged into the concourse, and the light hit them like a wall. Snow beyond the glass turned the floor into a sheet of reflected white, every shadow flattened, every movement magnified. Travelers paused again, drawn by the tension they could not name. A child pointed at Ranger. A woman frowned, then stepped aside. Phones came up. Good, Jack thought. Let them watch. Hayes moved with them, not close enough to touch, not far enough to lose sight. He spoke to one of the men without turning his head, lips barely moving. The men separated slightly, flanking the path ahead, casual as shoppers browsing. Ranger's hackles lifted a fraction, his ears swiveling, but he stayed glued to Jack's side. Emily leaned closer, her voice barely audible beneath the echo of footsteps. "He's their fixer," she said. "Hayes. He doesn't get his hands dirty. He just makes sure no one else can." Her breath caught. "If they get us alone, they won't," Jack said. His tone was flat, certain. He adjusted his pace to keep the flow of people around them, neither rushing nor slowing. Years of moving through hostile streets had taught him that speed was not always safety. Predictability was. They crossed beneath the grand arches of the station, snowlight spilling across the marble like frost. Ranger glanced back once, eyes locking briefly with the man in sunglasses. The man's mouth tightened. He shifted his stance, weight changing subtly, the signal of a decision made. Jack saw it and felt the clock accelerate. At the far end of the concourse, near the doors that led to the street, Jack spotted them. Two more figures standing still while everyone else moved. Plain clothes, hands in pockets, the same posture, the same readiness. They watched the approach with impassive faces, eyes tracking Ranger, the bag, Emily's belly. Jack slowed just enough to confirm it. The exit was bracketed. The city beyond was bright with snow and impossible angles. There would be no vanishing into traffic today. Ranger gave a low, steady sound, not fear, but acknowledgement. Jack met Emily's eyes and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't need to explain. The hunt had become visible now, exposed by the very light that was meant to protect them. And Jack Walker had never believed in running from hunters. Jack made the decision the way he had learned to make all hard decisions, quickly, quietly, and without ceremony. He did not announce it. He shifted his direction by a few degrees, letting the flow of the concourse carry them toward the departure boards instead of the blocked exits. The movement looked accidental to anyone not watching closely, just another adjustment in a crowded station under winter glare. To Ranger, it was a command. The German shepherd tightened his position, shoulder brushing Jack's leg, eyes flicking between the bag and the men ahead. He moved like a living shield, his dark sable coat absorbing light, his presence steady and unmistakable. Emily's breathing had gone shallow again. The walk across the concourse, the stares, the pressure of eyes and phones, all of it pressed against her ribs until each breath felt borrowed. She leaned into Jack's pace, trusting his direction without asking why. One hand stayed anchored on her belly, the other curled into the strap of the bag when Jack shifted it to keep the puppy supported. The little dog stirred once, a faint movement beneath the blanket, then settled as Ranger matched its rhythm with a low, steady breath. The departure board glowed ahead, rows of destinations scrolling in white and amber. Jack scanned it without slowing. Noon departures, regional lines, one train running on time, its platform announced, doors opening in 7 minutes. 7 minutes was an eternity in a blink. He angled them toward the platform access, letting a cluster of travelers pass first, using bodies as cover. As they walked, Jack slid his phone from his pocket without looking down. He tapped once, twice, then lifted it to his ear, his voice low enough to be lost beneath the echo of footsteps. "Mike," he said, "I need a favor, not tomorrow. Today." The voice on the other end answered with the sound of wind and traffic. Mike Reynolds had always sounded like he lived outdoors, even when he was standing still. "That's not how favors work," Mike said, his tone dry but alert. "It is today," Jack replied. I need a pickup at the next stop north. Quiet. Medical ready. He paused. I'm bringing a pregnant woman and a puppy. There was a beat of silence, then the sound of a door slamming somewhere. You always bring the easy ones, Mike said. I'll be there. Mike Reynolds was a few years older than Jack, built tall and rangy, the kind of man who looked lean even under layers. His hair had gone prematurely gray at the temples, cut short not for style but convenience. A scar ran along his left forearm, pale and ropey, the souvenir of a flood rescue that had gone wrong years back. He had left formal service after that, too many bodies pulled from places that should have held them, but he never stopped answering calls. Mike believed in showing up, not in institutions. It was the thing that had shaped him most. Jack ended the call and slipped the phone away. We're leaving, he said quietly to Emily, just enough information to steady her. Next stop, we get help. Emily nodded, lips pressed tight. She did not ask what kind of help. She trusted the certainty in his voice more than details. The platform entrance loomed, a wide opening framed by metal and glass, the outside world glowing white beyond it. The train was not in yet, but the track lights were on, the rails humming faintly beneath the floor. Jack slowed, letting a family with rolling luggage pass, then stepped aside as a group of commuters surged toward the gate. He felt it again, the tightening, the sense of being measured. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. Hayes would be smiling now. The station loudspeakers crackled overhead, the sound slicing cleanly through conversation. Attention Union Station, a voice intoned, practiced and neutral. Security is looking for a pregnant woman involved in a disturbance. Please report any information to station personnel. The words landed like ice water. Emily flinched hard enough that Jack felt it through her grip. Her face drained of color, and for a moment she swayed, the world narrowing to sound and light and fear. The announcement repeated, louder this time, and heads began to turn. Curiosity sharpened into scrutiny. The safety of the crowd, their anonymity, fractured. Jack did not stop. He adjusted his pace by a fraction, enough to keep moving without drawing attention. Ranger matched him step for step, his ears flattening briefly before lifting again, scanning. The puppy shifted under the blanket, a weak, questioning movement, and Ranger leaned in, blocking it from view with his body. Hayes appeared in Jack's peripheral vision, his smile exactly as Jack had imagined, thin, controlled, satisfied. He did not hurry. He did not need to. The announcement had done the work for him. The two men in plain clothes drifted closer to the platform entrance, their spacing tightening, their eyes no longer pretending disinterest. One of them spoke quietly into his sleeve, the corner of his mouth moving just enough to betray communication. Emily's breath hitched. They're going to stop us, she whispered. Not yet, Jack said. Eyes forward. He kept his tone level, the way he had learned to speak to people on ledges and in fires. Panic, once named, became a thing you could step around. The train rolled in with a low metallic groan, wind rushing ahead of it, snow lifting in a brief, blinding swirl. Doors slid open down the length of the platform, releasing warmth and the smell of oil and fabric and winter coats. The moment cracked open like a window. Jack moved. He guided Emily toward the nearest door, keeping his shoulder angled between her and the men approaching. Ranger flowed ahead, then back, a dark arc of motion that drew the eye without revealing the bag. A conductor stood near the door, middle-aged, bundled against the cold, his expression already tired of the day. Jack met his eyes and gave a nod that carried weight without explanation. The conductor hesitated, then stepped aside, the door yawning wider. They were 3 steps from the threshold when a figure stepped into the gap. The man was tall, broader than the others, his coat cut from expensive fabric that held its shape against the wind. He had a square jaw and a neatly trimmed beard, the kind that suggested grooming as routine rather than vanity. His eyes were calm, almost bored, and his movements were economical. He lifted a badge, just enough for Jack to see the glint of metal and the practiced angle. She needs to come with us, the man said, his voice firm but not raised. Now. The world compressed into a single point. Jack felt Ranger's body tense beside him, the dog's weight shifting forward in a controlled readiness that did not yet tip into action. Emily froze, her fingers digging into Jack's sleeve, her breath locked in her chest. The puppy stirred again, a faint sound escaping despite Ranger's effort to shield it. Jack did not reach for the badge. He did not argue. He looked at the man's face, then at the badge, then back again. "On what grounds?" he asked, his voice even. "Security," the man replied. "Disturbance. You heard the announcement." Jack glanced past him, meeting Hayes' eyes across the platform. Hayes inclined his head a fraction, a silent acknowledgement. The crowd had slowed, a ring of attention forming, phones raised again. Snowlight poured across the platform, flattening shadows, exposing every angle. Jack felt the clock tick. He felt Ranger's breath against his leg, steady and waiting. He felt Emily's fear, hot and sharp, and beneath it, something else. Resolve. "Step aside," Jack said. Not a threat, a statement. The man with the badge did not move. Behind him, the train doors chimed, warning of departure. Time, Jack thought, had finally caught them. Jack kept his voice level, almost gentle, but his hand tightened around Ranger's leash until he felt the leather bite into his palm. The platform gleamed under a skin of snow, light bouncing off steel rails and painted lines until every movement felt exposed, magnified. Wind pushed through the open sides of the station, carrying the cold up from the tracks and threading it through coats and collars. The train doors chimed again, an impatient, mechanical reminder that time was narrowing to a single point. The man with the badge stood firm in the doorway, feet planted shoulder-width apart, posture calm but immovable. Up close, he looked to be in his early 40s, broad-chested beneath the tailored coat, the kind of build that came from years of training rather than gym mirrors. His beard was trimmed close, dark with flecks of gray, and his eyes were steady, assessing rather than hostile. He didn't look like a brute. He looked like someone used to being obeyed, and that made him more dangerous. Behind him, the crowd slowed, drawn by the stillness at the door. Snow settled on shoulders and hats, turning strangers into pale silhouettes. Phones rose again, held higher this time. Jack felt the shift in the air, the moment when witnesses formed, when truth became harder to bury because too many eyes were watching. Ranger moved first, but not forward. He stepped sideways, positioning his body directly in front of the bag Jack held, his stance wide and deliberate. His dark sable coat rippled as muscles engaged, not for attack but for resistance. He didn't bare his teeth, he didn't bark, he simply blocked. The message was unmistakable. Whatever was behind him was not to be touched. Emily's breath hitched sharply. She pressed both hands to her belly now, her face tightening with pain and fear. It was not a scream, not yet, but a sharp intake that made Jack's spine stiffen. "Jack," she whispered, her voice cracking, "something's wrong." Jack angled his body closer to her, lowering his head just enough to keep his words private. "Talk to me," he said. "I'm cramping," she said, panic breaking through. "It's not strong, but it's not nothing." She swallowed hard, tears freezing at the corners of her eyes. "If they take me, if they separate me from him—" Her gaze flicked to the bag, then back to Jack. "My baby won't be safe." The words landed heavy, cutting through the noise like a blade. A few people nearby went still, expressions shifting from curiosity to alarm. Jack followed Emily's line of sight and saw it then. A faint yellowing bruise around her wrist, half hidden by her coat sleeve. Old, healing. The mark of fingers, not accident. Control, not chaos. Jack's jaw tightened. He straightened and looked at the man with the badge again. "She needs medical attention," he said calmly. "Right now." The man hesitated, just a fraction. It was enough. "That's not my call," he replied. A low sound vibrated from Ranger's chest, not a growl, but a warning tone that carried weight. Several people flinched. A woman in a red scarf gasped softly. Somewhere behind them, a child began to cry. Jack heard his phone vibrate against his hip. He shifted just enough to glance down. Mike Reynolds' name flashed across the screen. Jack answered without moving away from the door. "I'm here," Mike said, his voice tight with urgency. "North lot, but I've got company. 2 vehicles, dark SUVs. They're not trying to hide." Jack exhaled slowly. "Stay put," he said. "Keep eyes on them." Hayes chose that moment to step closer. He moved past the edge of the crowd with practiced ease, hands visible, posture relaxed, as if he were nothing more than a concerned observer. Up close, the lines in his face were sharper, his eyes colder than they had looked through glass. Snow dusted the shoulders of his coat without melting. He leaned in just enough that only Jack could hear him. His voice was low, almost conversational. "You really don't know what she took," Hayes murmured. or who she took it from. His gaze flicked briefly to Emily's belly, then to the bag, then back to Jack's eyes. This doesn't end on a train platform. Jack did not respond immediately. He felt Ranger's steady presence, felt the puppy shift faintly beneath the blanket, felt Emily's trembling through the sleeve she still gripped. He also felt the weight of the crowd, the snow witnesses, silent and watching, recording everything Hayes thought he could still control. "You should step back," Jack said at last, his voice flat. "You're making this worse." Hayes smiled thinly. "You're making it public," he replied. "That's brave, or stupid." Before Jack could answer, Sarah Mills pushed through the ring of onlookers. Her bun had loosened slightly, strands of blonde hair escaping around her face, cheeks flushed from the cold. Her eyes were sharp, locked on the confrontation, and her radio crackled softly at her shoulder. She took in the scene in seconds, the blocked door, the badge, Ranger's stance, Emily's distress. "Everyone take a step back," Sarah said, her voice cutting cleanly through the tension. "This platform is not a holding area." She turned to the man with the badge. "Who are you with?" The man hesitated again. He lifted the badge a second time, but Sarah didn't reach for it. She looked past it, straight at his face. Years of station work had taught her the difference between authority and performance. Emily let out a small cry and bent forward slightly, one hand bracing against Jack's arm. "Please," she said louder now, her voice carrying across the platform. "I'm pregnant. I need help." The words rippled outward. A man near the edge of the crowd raised his phone higher. Another woman stepped closer, eyes wide. Snow continued to fall, silent and steady, coating the platform like a blank page waiting to be filled. Ranger sat abruptly, still blocking the bag, his body pressed close to Jack's leg. It was a grounding move, one Jack recognized instantly. Ranger was choosing stillness, forcing everyone else to move around him, or not at all. Sarah took a step closer to Emily. "Ma'am," she said, her tone shifting, softening. "I'm going to call medical. Stay with me." Hayes's expression tightened, irritation flashing through the calm. He opened his mouth to speak, but Jack beat him to it. "She's not going anywhere with you," Jack said. Not raised, not shouted, final. For a moment, no one moved. The train doors chimed again, louder now, warning of imminent departure. The crowd held its breath. Hayes looked around, finally taking in the cameras, the faces, the snow, bright openness he could no longer control. Jack felt the balance tip, not toward safety yet, but toward exposure. Whatever Hayes had planned thrived in shadows. Here, under falling snow and 100 unblinking lenses, it faltered. Hayes leaned in once more, his voice barely audible. "This isn't over," he said. Jack met his gaze without blinking. "It never is," he replied. The train doors began to close. Jack made his choice in a way that felt almost anticlimactic. No raised voice, no sudden movement, just a clean step into the brightest slice of the platform where the security cameras converged. He guided Emily forward with a gentle pressure at her elbow, positioning her beneath the lattice of lenses and reflected snowlight until there was no corner left for shadows to hide in. "Right here," he said softly. "We stay right here." The words were not instructions so much as a promise. Ranger followed instantly, planting himself beside the bag and lowering his body to the ground, a living barrier and a source of warmth. The snow beyond the rails glittered under the noon sun, and the crowd's attention sharpened into something different now, less curiosity, more concern. Mike Reynolds appeared at the edge of the platform with the urgency of a man who never wasted motion. He cut through the onlookers with long strides, tall and rangy in a weathered parka dusted white at the shoulders. His prematurely gray hair was tucked under a knit cap, his face windburned, eyes alert and steady. Years of rescue work had carved patience into him. He read scenes quickly and acted without drama. With him came a woman carrying a compact medical case and a thermal pack slung over one shoulder. She moved briskly, confident and focused, dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail that bounced once as she stopped. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, a veterinarian in her early 40s, medium height and athletic build, skin warm-toned despite the cold, eyes a calm hazel that radiated competence. She had the look of someone accustomed to triage, gentle hands, decisive mind. A local traffic officer followed a few steps behind them, bundled in a reflective jacket, his face open and earnest, cheeks ruddy from the cold. He was younger than Jack, perhaps late 20s, with a square jaw and a tentative mustache that suggested this was not his usual assignment. He slowed when he saw the cameras and the crowd, understanding instinctively that whatever happened next would be witnessed and remembered. "Let's make space," Sarah Mitchell said, her voice firm but kind. She knelt beside the bag without touching it yet, glancing at Ranger and then at Jack. "He's doing the right thing," she added, recognizing the dog's posture. Ranger lifted his head just enough to meet her eyes, then settled again, his chest rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to pull the air around him into order. Emily's breathing steadied as Sarah checked her pulse and blood pressure with efficient calm, speaking in a low, reassuring cadence. "Cramping can happen under stress," she said. "We'll keep you warm and still." She wrapped a thermal blanket around Emily's shoulders, careful to leave room for her belly, and met her gaze. "You're safe right now." Emily nodded, tears freezing on her lashes, a fragile smile flickering for the first time. Jack crouched beside the bag and spoke quietly with Mike, who had already positioned himself to block the view of Hayes and the men lingering beyond the crowd. Mike's eyes never stopped scanning. "Two SUVs backed off," he murmured. "They're watching. They don't like this." "They don't have to," Jack replied. He straightened and raised his voice just enough to carry without shouting. "We're requesting medical assistance for a pregnant woman and veterinary aid for a puppy in distress. This is public, recorded, and ongoing." He angled his body so the cameras caught his face, the uniform, the dog, the bag, every element plain as daylight. Hayes stood a dozen steps away now, his composure thinning at the edges. The snow-bright openness robbed him of leverage. When he spoke, it was to the man with the badge, a clipped exchange that carried irritation more than authority. The badge holder hesitated, eyes darting to the cameras, to Sarah Mitchell's hands, to the traffic officer who had stepped closer with a hand raised, not threatening, but unmistakably present. "Sir," the officer said, addressing Hayes and the badge holder both, "we're going to pause any movement until medical clears her." It was the kind of simple sentence that gained power from witnesses. Sarah Mitchell gently eased the zipper open the rest of the way, shielding the puppy from glare with her body. The little German shepherd lay curled against the worn blanket, fur patchy and thin, ribs visible with each shallow breath. Sarah's hands were deft and tender as she checked gums, temperature, hydration. "Hypothermia and dehydration," she said, "but he's fighting." She slid a warming pack beneath the blanket and nodded toward Ranger. "Stay," she told the dog softly. Ranger didn't move. The puppy's breathing slowed, steadied, responding to the heat and the quiet presence pressed beside it. Emily watched, hand to her mouth, a soundless sob breaking into laughter when the puppy stirred and settled again. Jack felt the tension he had carried since dawn begin to loosen its grip. "Jack," Mike said, holding out a phone. "She has names, places, photos." Emily had already unlocked her own phone with shaking fingers, scrolling through messages and images she had guarded like talismans through the night. Jack took them one by one, turning the screen so the cameras could see without revealing private details. Facility names, transfer dates, a ledger snapshot, a message thread that turned threats into evidence. He handed the phone to the traffic officer, who swallowed and nodded, suddenly older. "Sir," the officer said to Hayes, his voice steady now, "I'm going to ask you and your associates to remain here while we contact detectives. There are allegations of harassment, stalking, and intimidation." Hayes opened his mouth, then closed it. The winter sun caught his eyes, and for the first time, uncertainty cracked the smooth surface. He glanced at the cameras, at the crowd, at Ranger's unmoving bulk beside the bag. He took a step back, then another, as if the ground itself had become unreliable. The badge holder lowered his hand. The men in plain clothes drifted away from the exits, their practiced spacing dissolving under scrutiny. By mid-afternoon, the platform had transformed into a controlled scene. Detectives arrived, sober-faced and methodical, collecting statements and devices. Hayes and his associates were escorted aside, no cuffs yet, but no freedom either, paused by process, pinned by daylight. Sarah Mills reappeared briefly at Jack's shoulder, her bun fully undone now, strands of blonde hair escaping as she exhaled. "You did the right thing," she said simply. Jack nodded once. When the sun dipped and the snow took on a softer glow, Emily sat wrapped in warmth, cleared by medical checks and smiling through exhaustion. Sarah Mitchell transferred the puppy to a heated carrier, her hands gentle, her expression satisfied. "He'll make it," she said, "and when he's ready, we'll talk adoption." Ranger followed the carrier with solemn attention, then settled beside it, chin on paws, guardian to the end. Jack stood with Emily at the edge of the platform as the crowd thinned and the noise receded. The winter sun reflected off the snow like a promise kept. Emily reached for his hand, her grip sure now. "Thank you," she said, and this time her smile held. Ranger snorted softly, as if in agreement, and the puppy slept on, warm and safe, the smallest life in a chain of choices that had finally bent toward mercy. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of a frightened mother, a wounded little life, and a dog who listens when the world does not. Many believe that God speaks only in words, but perhaps he also speaks through instincts, through compassion placed in a human heart, through a loyal animal who refuses to walk away. That day, under a winter sun and falling snow, no one planned to witness a miracle. Yet mercy showed up anyway. And when mercy appears, lives are changed forever. In our everyday lives, we may never stand in a train station like that. But each of us will face moments where we must choose between looking away or stepping into the light and doing what is right. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every one. And subscribe to the channel to stay with us for more stories about faith, loyalty, and second chances. May God bless you. May he protect your family, and may his quiet miracles find you exactly when you need them most.